Hello everyone! Sitting here in the car waiting for Anya to return. With the new lockdown, Anya's buying some stuff here in the supermarket. With the new lockdown regulations, situation getting worse in Belgium by the day. It's not, we're not allowed to enter the shop with more than one person. Anyways, time for some questions to answer. One question is from Ihor of Ihor. I hope I pronounced your name correct. Ihor sends a long message, sharing how much he enjoys actually the discovery or rediscovery of these what we think are historical tempi, and how obvious it becomes that once you know that this exists, how obvious it becomes when you listen to regular performances, how the people and musicians struggle with giving each note its value. It's true. And also there was a question or a point regarding Mendelssohn, and a general question or a question, how can you actually know when it is a whole beat composer or not? And that's a very interesting question. It's also something that we are not ready with the research, I would say. So generally you could say single beat and whole beat coexisted. And we found some very nice sources that we were able to connect, thanks also to another patron, with each other. And actually you could say whole beat principle. So when you have an adjustable device, a pendulum or a metronome, you are able to find the metrum, so the periodic unity, the definition, I would say, of a note value. In this case, that is the note value in the metronome mark. It relates to the up and down movement of the arm. And again, I've been saying this a long time, but it goes back to the principle that you had in the mensural times, where the up and down movement defined the tactus, the semibrevis, was just one tempo. Not entirely, but in general. And so this up and down, this unity of two of the subdivision of the semibrevis actually gave the meter, so gives the definition of the tempo. I can talk about this forever, but if you see that connection, it's easy to understand that when you have an adjustable device like a metronome, that gives you the possibility of just define that meter for every speed you want. On the other hand, if you have just a clock, so the ticks of a clock, the only possibility you have is just adhere to that tick a certain note value. And we have some sources like Wiedeburg. One of the patrons actually gave that source, was a musicologist, young guy, great. I mean, Wiedeburg is an important source. 18th century, I think Leipzig. So right after Bach's period, you have also Turk, who uses the ticks of a Taschenuhr, so a pocket watch. And so, but when you have that principle, you don't have an adjustable device. The only thing you can do is say, okay, these ticks or these ticks of a certain clock, second clock or half second clock, like in Germany at the time and still today, represent that note value. But what it does is actually very simple. It's the application of a whole beat system, but on a very low scale. For instance, when you have a quarter note 60 at a metronome, you would say we define the periodic unity. Two eighth notes together form that quarter note. With the clock you don't have that possibility, because you only have the frequency. It's not adjustable. So these two eighth notes that you can define by, of the quarter note that you can define by two eighth notes in the case of a metronome, you take those eighth notes and you attach them to the ticks of that pendulum, of that clock. And so you have actually a very poor but practical application of that, of what a metronome can do. But this gave, this is actually the root, I think, for the single beat use. You have then 1820s Vincent Novello, who published a lot of religious music. Also Bach, Handel, Mozart, Haydn masses, and he metronomized everything in a way that is, I think, undeniably. I mean, it's hard to think that that's whole beat. These tempi are outside any tradition, and also there, for instance, and that was also mentioned by our friend, where Melzel, for instance, says an allegro for 4 common time you mark by the minim. Beethoven does that everywhere, almost. In Novello, it's very rare that you find an allegro in common time marked with the minim, with a half note. Oftentimes, most times, it's a quarter note. So that's a strong sign that those metronome marks are single beat. Now, Melzel makes a complaint about people who misuse his metronome and they use it as a kind of cheap clock. That's what he meant. So Novello used the metronome as if it was only a frequency tool and not an adjustable device that potentially could give the meter of that note value. And so that makes sense. That connection is a very strong connection, because we can see that their kind of single beat use started because of this clock reference, and certainly in English-speaking countries they had that much more than in German-speaking countries. So to answer your question, or in other words, this already shows that it's hard to answer your question, to exactly say which chords are whole beat and which chords are single beat. What might be the case, and I'm not sure because we haven't been researching that for a long time, but we're just touching upon the surfaces now of something new actually. What might be the case is that religious music, because Vincent Novello was very influential as an editor, that more and more that kind of music was metronomized in that way. We see that, for instance, the Deutsches Requiem by Brahms, one of his few metronomizations. Compare that to some of his other metronomizations for, let's say, world music, symphonic music, piano music, his scherzo, trio, I would say. Opus, one of his earlier ones is metronomized by him, Piano Concerto 2. That's another world, that's another universe. And so oftentimes you will, just by comparing, know that one score is whole beat and the other single beat. Now, in general, you could say in the 19th century, the majority is whole beat. That was the norm. But single beat, as also the metronome was being used more and more as a timekeeper to practice, is becoming more and more the norm. What I would say really at the end of the 19th century. And even in early 20th century, you have metronome numbers that, not openly talking about this on YouTube because we cannot give enough context, but our feeling is that those might be whole beat as well. And so there is a lot that needs to be clarified. Also, why did people use sometimes a single beat and whole beat, for which occasions? When music became slower, because church music or religious music was considered to be slower, was that more practically on the metronome? I don't know. It ties into some comments I got on the channel, like from people saying back in the days, might even then old teachers said, when it's metronome mark is too fast, just take 2 ticks for 1. Might be that simple. People just knew it, and oftentimes the differences will be really, really, really big. So that's a complex answer to what you might have thought to be a simple answer. I think in practical life this might be not as hard as it sounds now, but there are open questions there, important questions that we will not be able to fully answer with the book, though it will have its own chapter there. But in the future this might lead to a better understanding of how these mechanisms worked. So, okay, hope that answers a little bit of your question. By the way, Mendelssohn's metronomizations, there are not so many. For a reason I don't know, he didn't metronomize a lot. When he was metronomizing, it was often for a complaint that his tempi were not followed. I could make some videos on YouTube. There are some interesting stories about this. But Mendelssohn, I haven't been diving into his works, and certainly not connected to the metronome. I have a lot of metronome numbers though for Mendelssohn's works by Mertke, German editor, musician, really great metronome numbers. Also, he did a lot of Chopin. I'll upload those to the Dropbox folder that is accessible by you. I hope this was how this was helpful. And if you have questions, don't hesitate. Always here.